Walter Burley Griffin, an amazing person. I think you've all seen the brief, and you probably know more about the history and circumstances than I do. But my understanding is that your challenge is to take his vision and deliver it in a context that's respectful of its history and setting. That it has to be locally relevant. You've already got, I believe, 400 or 500 people living out there. Importantly, it has to be resilient, and I know resilience is the favourite word of the year in a COVID-19 setting. But I think with as with sustainability some time back, I don't think a lot of people actually understand what resilience is about. And we can talk a bit more about that as we go on. But it is important that it is resilient. It's important in a similar vein that it's pragmatic, that it is a practical solution that's capable of implementation, as distinct from a theoretical one that looks good on paper but actually just can't be built. The graphic on the right, by the way, is a near map projection of what the site currently looks like, at least a month or two back. A little bit of humour for those who feel like it. I like my comics. Sustainability, I'm telling you stuff you already know. Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That involves that's a fine balance between a range of factors. It's important to remember that sustainability is not just about the environment. It's a bit like a three-legged bar stool. If anyone's tried to sit on a one-legged bar stool or a two-legged bar stool, you've probably hurt yourself. It is important that there are three legs, that they're equal length and about 120 degrees apart. If you can get that right, you have a sustainable outcome. It needs to balance environmental, social and economic needs. Or we could go down the insanity route, which is a lot of fun for a little while, but generally speaking tends to end up hurting somebody or something. Everyone had a chance to read the comic, so we'll move on. COVID-19, I think it's fair to say in many respects, has it's been a catalyst for change. We've been struggling along, looking for ways to improve the way we do things, but the imperative of the day-to-day, get up, go to work or study or school or whatever it might be, it fights against it. All of a sudden, this virus showed up nearly 12 months back. And as terrible as it's been, and our hearts go out to those that have been hurt by it, it has given us the opportunity to relook at things. So you look, for example, at working from home. We've talked about it for decades, but it never happened. And now, all of a sudden, we've had a break and an ability to make a substantive change. Now, things will settle back to what normality, I might beg my pardon, we settle back to, I don't think anyone really knows yet, but I think we're all fairly convinced it won't be what we left 12 months back. So there's opportunities there. There's an increasing desire for independence and for flexibility in our life, in our work-life balance, in how we do it, where we do it, and how much control we have over it. There is a growing awareness of the importance of sustainability. We're seeing it in the bushfires we've had earlier this year, in rising temperatures, probably rising sea levels. It's becoming increasingly important that we take responsibility. And again, look at the definition of sustainability. There's a desire for more flexible living to accommodate changes in personal circumstances, children leaving home, coming back again because they can't afford to live away from home. Our circumstances changing. So we want housing options that are more flexible. We're increasingly reliant on data and online services. And again, there's this overall shift to resilience, to the ability to cope with change and respond positively to that. And I don't mean by stockpiling toilet paper. I still don't understand that, by the way. Someone will have to explain it to me one day. So what are the ingredients for success? Well, look, just taken in a servicing context, because that's what flow is involved in. What we're looking at is, first of all, how do you reduce consumption? That's the first thing we're supposed to be trying to do. So can we reduce consumption of water via energy efficient, water and energy, sorry, by energy efficient buildings, landscaping, public lighting, everything we do, is there a way to use less of it? Because if you can use less of it, you're immediately a long way ahead. As an example, drinking water or potable water. Why do we use it for, we certainly should not be using it for watering our plants. But why are we using it in our washing machines? The quality of recycled water we can produce these days is actually better than you get out of your tap. And here in Flow, when we want to prove a point to the regulators, we drink it. We're quite happy to. It is higher quality, proven, than what you are getting out of your tap. So why aren't we using this stuff in our washing machines? Why aren't we using this stuff far more liberally in our homes? Okay, under regulation, we're not allowed to drink it. Who knows, maybe that'll change one day. Anyone that's been to Singapore, believe it or not, has drunk recycled water. It's called new water. And importantly, community engagement and awareness. It's important that the community understands the benefits of reductions in consumption. I don't think that needs to be explained. So, having dealt with reduction, we then move on to reuse. What we do have to produce, can we reuse it? So can we reuse rainwater? And I'm not necessarily talking about rainwater tanks. There's an increasing body of evidence that rainwater tanks actually don't do a particularly good job. Obviously, can we reuse wastewater? Can we use the solids that are produced? There is a byproduct of wastewater. There is always some solid residue. The wonderful thing about those solids are they're incredibly high in nutrients and help your plants grow. Recycling. Obviously, wastewater for domestic use, we've talked about that. Solar energy as a community power source. So we have all this sun hitting us every day, at least when it's not cloudy. Can we recycle that? And then resilience in a servicing context at the moment is probably best looked at in terms of the backup facilities that we can have. So your core servicing is your recycled water, is your solar and storage. But then your resilience comes from looking at things like cogeneration and waste to energy, the ability to back up those core elements, and integrated water balance management, where you don't look at, in a traditional development context, we tend to separate the water trains. So we have drinking water, and then we have storm water, and then you might, if you're lucky, have recycled water, and we tend to actually try and separate them. If we're going to be successful, they've got to be integrated so that you can balance them all out. An example of that is when we're producing recycled water, the production of wastewater is relatively consistent throughout the year. We all tend to take roughly the same number of showers, use about the same amount of washing machine water, dishwasher water, say that 3 times. We tend to produce about the same amount of wastewater throughout the year. However, we consume more recycled water in summer for obvious reasons. We irrigate our plants more in summer, and therefore there is an imbalance in supply and demand. Now, what ideally you're trying to do is to balance that out, and the way you balance it out is by integrating both your drinking water and your storm water into the system. So a little bit about water. This is standard documentation out of the company's website. Well, it's just being amended. I think I've talked about most of this, but Flow is committed to reuse of water. The important thing there is that the success with reuse and recycling, it dramatically increases the earlier we're involved in a project. If we try and retrofit it halfway through, it's much harder to do. So as with most things, your ability to affect change dramatically increases the earlier on you're involved. In doing that, what you're trying to do is, here we're calling it future-proof. I like to call it a bit more about resilience. What you're trying to do, Flow is not a contractor. We build things, but we don't hand them over, we keep them. So our interest in our infrastructure is a long-term one. We are looking to build facilities and then operate them for 50, 100, 200 years. The beauty of that is we're not just interested in the quality of the delivery, but in its long-term operational efficiency and performance. And then the complete service offering we've talked about before, multi-utility drinking water. Sorry, I should explain a bit also about drinking water. I mentioned earlier on that under existing legislation, you can't drink recycled water. And therefore Flow can't produce it. But what we can do is distribute it. So quite often what we can and will do is, you may have a situation where there is a water main servicing a property, and that water main only has a limited capacity. It might be able to service 50, 100 people. But what we can do is we can build ourselves a storage tank, and we can take an off-peak supply off that water main. So when everybody's asleep at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning, our tanks are filling up out of that water main because the capacity is there. And then when everybody gets up in the morning, they start to draw down on the capacity in our tanks, which is fine. They're designed for that. And then at night, once everybody's gone to bed, they fill back up again. And what that enables you to do is to actually make no net impact on the public utilities water supply. They don't notice it because the capacity of the pipe has not had to change. So we actually can deliver a drinking water solution even though we're not arguably producing the drinking water. I spoke before about stormwater harvesting. What that's important about is to enable us to balance up our recycled water. When you don't have an effective water balance, in periods where your recycled water consumption exceeds your wastewater production, you actually have to top it up with drinking water, and that is a travesty. It should never happen. And we're working very actively with local and state governments to try and ensure that that is solved. I've spoken before about local treatment, production reuse. The facilities that we provide are at a local scale. They are designed to suit the particular local circumstance that they exist in. They're scalable. We can build a facility that will service as little as probably about 500 people, relatively cost effectively. It is more cost effective the larger it gets, but we can start as small as that. There is no limit to how big it can be. Our largest facility to date services about 20,000 people. It's not finished yet, but it will ultimately service 20,000 people. And it can be bigger. Energy. Again, the primary objective is always to minimise consumption, and I would assume in this challenge that is one of the key things you're trying to do. There are amazing things that we can do to reduce consumption of energy in homes. I'm not an architect or a planner, so I'm not good at that sort of things, but a simple example would be natural ventilation, high ceiling heights, and the use of ceiling fans is distinct from air conditioning. Enormous benefit just in doing that sort of thing. But materials, how you orientate homes, all these sorts of things make an enormous difference. Having dealt with that side of things, the next important thing is to have what we call an embedded energy network. That's it's a long, that's a complex sounding term. All it really means is that you are effectively gating a community. So you're, again, we don't, other than solar power, sorry, let me go back a step. Generally speaking, you need to be connected to the grid. The technology isn't quite at a stage yet where power can cost effectively be produced off-grid. So you want a connection to the grid, but it's a bit like drinking water. You just need that baseline level of service. What you want to do is set up your community so that there is effectively a gate that baseline power comes through, and then we reticulate that energy supply through the development in what's called an embedded energy network. It's a private network. And we augment it with solar power, waste to energy, battery storage. When it becomes more cost effective, generally speaking, it's not quite there yet. And a range of other initiatives that we can look at. And that's all an embedded energy network really talks about, is that we take power at wholesale rates at a gate. We pay the authority, and then we reticulate it for a retail price within the development. An important component of that is smart metering. As an example of that is looking at electric vehicle charging stations. Electric vehicle chargers actually are large drainers of power, because you're trying to, generally speaking, charge your car quite quickly. When you have smart meters, you're able to, so even when somebody plugs their Tesla into the outlet at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, generally speaking, they're not really concerned about how long it takes the Tesla to recharge. They just want it ready at 7 o'clock in the morning. So the smart meter can anticipate that and make sure that the charging is happening at 3 o'clock in the morning when nobody's using any power, and it smooths out your peak consumption. As I said, storage costs are improving. This is batteries we're talking about, but they're really yet to get to a point where we can see broad scale rollout. There's some really interesting stuff being done with batteries. Hydrogen, not sure yet. Watch this space, and other potential options as well, but it's just not quite there. But the challenge always, and this is where resilience comes in, is to make sure that whatever systems you're designing are able to adapt to future technological change. It's really what, in my view, is a large component of resilience. So, for instance, when batteries do become cost effective, how do you readily integrate them into your network? What are the challenges? Challenges are interesting. Are they a problem or an opportunity? And I think hopefully most of you see them as opportunities, because pretty much every problem you're ever going to come across in life is actually an opportunity in disguise. So here's just a list of some that come to mind. Obviously environmental. What you're looking at there is, as a baseline, a nil net impact on the environment. Ideally, what you're looking for is a positive outcome. We've gone a bit too far, as we can all see. And we're a bit beyond the point where having no impact is good enough now. We actually need to be looking for positive impacts. Social, you have to be careful to make sure that whatever you're implementing is socially acceptable. Now, a clear example of that is drinking recycled water. Even if it was regulatory, I'm not sure if that's a word, acceptable, the fact of the matter is most of the community at the moment is not prepared to do it. So you create a community that relies on drinking recycled water, and you will probably fail, at least in Australia at the moment. Practicality. Doable. That's probably not a word either. But whatever you come up with has to be practically implementable. It's got to be scalable. So you have to, what you can't afford to do is be designing infrastructure that costs an incredibly lot of money just to get going when there isn't a huge population. That doesn't meet the test of sustainability. So you have to be able to scale it in so that there is not a massive cost to the community or the public at large. that you can scale it up. And the KISS principle, for those who don't know what KISS is, I'm not looking for a date. That's keep it simple, stupid. Try and keep it as simple as possible. That's the best way to make sure that it will work. Regulatory is always an issue, and we do live in a very bureaucratic society. So is it permissible? If not, can it be made so? So what is the difficulty of affecting change? You have to look at that. And again, the example is drinking recycled water. We at Flow believe it should happen, but we also know that we're wasting our time trying to bring about regulatory change. It won't happen, at least in the near future. Any politician that runs that up the flagpole will get kicked out of their seat, so they're not going to support it. Bureaucratic, yes, there is time, resources, risk, and the potential issue with incumbent competitors. So you have to factor in that the time it takes to get approvals to do what you want to do. I'll talk in a minute about the WHITTIng Act. I'll explain what that is in a second, and about the amount of time it takes us to get a license to deliver water services. We have to factor that into to all of our proposals. Competition, generally speaking, is a good thing, and we encourage it. But sometimes our competitors are actually fearful of us, and when they're in positions of market dominance, that can create a problem. Technological. Is it feasible? And are you operating in an area where there is a substantial rate of change of technology? So if you look at solar panels and you go back even 10, 15 years back, the efficiency and cost of solar panels was changing almost on a daily basis. And that made life difficult because you were trying to run feasibility models across something that was moving in front of your eyes. It's settled down now, and we're all fairly comfortable with it. But now, now that would probably be applicable to batteries. That is something that's changing at a rapid rate. So at what point do you commit to a particular technology, and how do you make sure that you can future-proof it? Financial, I think, goes without saying. It's a core component of sustainability. How do you ensure that it is financially viable, that it can be funded, and that the risks that are associated with the overall financial package are appropriately mitigated? In other words, that you've made reasonable assumptions. And of course, there's always politics. What is the flavour of the month in political circles? Can you solve a problem? If you can solve a problem for the politicians, you're more likely to have success. Case in point, that graphic is of our first local water centre. It's at a place called Pitttown in the northwest of Sydney. You can go out and visit it. It's on the Hawkesbury River, or close to it. That was delivered, well, that went into operation nearly 10 years ago, and is still there. The Water Industry Competition Act, WICA, was brought in 2006. It was brought in to encourage, effectively, competition. In Sydney, at least, up until Pitttown was opened, you did not have an option in terms of your water provider. It was Sydney Water or nothing. Now you have options. Can't say that Sydney Water is necessarily terribly happy about that, but they don't have a choice in it. The WICA Act has enabled that. That said, it's a slow and cumbersome process. It typically takes us, from the day we start work on a project, it takes us about 18 months to get a WICA license for a project. About the first 6 months is in consultant investigations and documentation, and the balance, 12 months, is usually what it takes to get the approval. The WICA Act was brought in response to the Millennium Drought. Interestingly, we've just had another drought. And what was pleasing to see, one of our more recent projects, which actually isn't far from Pitttown, at a place called Box Hill, we had the interesting situation of having a community built around our local water centre across the road from a community that was serviced by Sydney Water. During the drought, up until, well, really this time last year, our community had unrestricted access to water for irrigating their landscaping. So their gardens were green, they were out there proudly watering their trees, and they were enjoying themselves, washing their cars. Across the road, everything was dying because it was being supplied by drinking water, and water restrictions were in place. In fact, Sydney Water were that embarrassed about it, they actually tried to stop our residents from using our water. And we had to step in and tell them to go away. And they were only doing it because they were embarrassed that we were demonstrating effectively how much superior our service was. But it was a great example of how we were able to actually encourage our people to use water in periods when most other people could not use it. I don't think anybody wants to talk too much about regulation. I think I've pretty well talked about the rest of this. A few examples of work we've done, and this might give you some some clues from how you might want to deal with things. You're welcome to go and look at some of these projects. Central Park is a fairly well-known high-density development, and to date, you're probably getting the impression that private utilities are rolled out more in a greenfield environment. Well, here is a development on the old Carlton United Brewery site, just across the road from Central Station. It's only about 200 or 300 metres away. Actually, it's across the road from UTS. Only finished fairly recently, and this is one of our projects. 2,000 customers, multiple water sources, recycled water produced for domestic use, car washing. We've got a reverse osmosis RO train which is used for the cooling towers, for the air conditioning for the high rises, and we've actually now extended the facility, and it now supplies recycled water to UTS itself. So it's been a very, very successful operation. All of the plant is in the basement. You can't see it. You can't see it. You can't smell it. You can't hear it. Gables is the Box Hill project I mentioned. Actually could end up being 5,000 households when it's finished. I've spoken about what happened in the last drought, the extensive green space. It was the catalyst to enable that project to proceed. If we hadn't serviced it, it would still be paddocks with horses grazing on it. Sydney Water were not willing to deliver a service to it. The response to our services there have been so strong that the project actually changed hands. It was initially started by a company called Celestino. They, about 6 months or so back, sold the project. They built the first 1,000 dwellings, or lots, should I say, and then sold it to Stockland. Stockland, interestingly, have rebadged it. They've kept the name The Gables, but if you go on their website and look at The Gables, you will see that the marketing ploy is "Your grass is greener." So they've embraced what we've done and used it as part of that, not only a part of their marketing pitch, but actually as the core of it. The Orchards is an interesting one. This is in Norwest, for those of you that know Sydney, just off the M7. I'll lose track of numbers. It's an integrated residential employment zone. We are servicing 1,300 apartments there. 130 odd have been finished. There's another 60 under development right now. And it's a really interesting energy solution where we have solar panels on roofs. We are supplying hot water to 3 or 4 swimming pools. We have a micro CHP. Actually, there'll be ultimately 3 or maybe even 4 micro CHP units. They produce heat and power. And we are just in the process of implementing electric vehicle charging stations as well. 30% reduction in carbon emissions on business as usual. And importantly, the energy for community facilities is delivered free. So the heating of the pools and the lighting for the public areas is provided free from the solar panels. What's the community get? What you're looking for out of a successful utility scheme, year-round unrestricted irrigation. We're reading more and more about the importance of cooling urban environments, that we've been taking out all the trees, and that the resultant climatic effects, particularly in a local context in the west of Sydney, are quite horrendous. You're looking at an increasing number of days where the temperature in Western Sydney gets over 45 degrees, and that can be tracked in many respects back to a lack of vegetation. So you want irrigation water to generate more landscaping, to help not only reduce the heat island effect, but actually put a bit more oxygen back into the air. You want to see wastewater valued as a resource. It's not something to get rid of and chuck out into the ocean. It is a valuable resource to recycle and to reduce the demand on ever increasingly precious drinking water supplies. By doing that, you're reducing exposure to water price hikes and shortages, as we've seen just 12 months back. Some of you would be aware Sydney Water came out with a new pricing policy on water. My take on their pricing policy was, let's wait until we run out of water and then we'll charge you twice as much for it. Now, that is not a sustainable pricing policy for water. One day, by the way, we're going to truly value drinking water and we're going to charge a lot more for it, but we need to do that across the board, not just when we run out. We need to reduce the load on our sensitive waterways within urban growth areas. We need to value our waterways and make sure that we're not tipping, quite bluntly, effluent into it. What tends to happen, if anyone's ever gone down to their local creek after a significant rain event, you actually need to be careful about touching the water in that creek, because what is probably the case is raw sewage is being tipped into that creek. Why? Sydney Water and most of the public authorities' sewer networks are incredibly inefficient. They allow masses of infiltration, so there are breakages in pipes everywhere for various reasons. And so during rainfall events, the amount of water going through their system can increase up to 10-fold on normal. Their system can't cope, and its only response is to tip raw sewage straight into the waterways. This needs to stop. One, because you're throwing away a valuable resource, and two, because you're damaging your water environment. We want to facilitate housing stock and affordability. The example I gave of Box Hill North earlier on, you have a project of nearly 5,000 dwellings that would not have happened if we hadn't come up with the private servicing solution. That is increasing stock and it's increasing affordability. And you want to bring communities together around a common purpose, something that they can they share, that they can see the value in, that they're actually proud of. Oh, it's about time for another comic, wasn't it? How does it work? I mentioned earlier on, the important thing is about collaboration at an early stage. Landowners, developers, government. The earlier you do it, the more likely you are to produce a substantially improved outcome. And it's for all stakeholders. This isn't just about flow. Flow is a business, and flow is in business to make money. But we have a very, very strong, incredibly strong sustainability mantra. And we believe that a successful outcome is one where all stakeholders equally benefit. Early and proactive engagement I've spoken about, but importantly, no sacred cows. We have a very strong ethos that there is no such thing as it can't be done. Sometimes, maybe there are reasons why, sometimes that does end up happening, but from the outset, no sacred cows, nothing that can't be looked at. If you take that approach on this challenge, that there's nothing you can't look at, yep, you're going to throw a lot of ideas out, but at least you're letting them in and letting them be assessed. And that's the important thing. And again, I mentioned earlier, a long-term view on all opportunities, and that's a core part of sustainability and resilience. Flows are part of the communities that we serve. Our interests are therefore aligned. If we can't deliver a long-term sustainable servicing solution, ultimately we'll get kicked out anyway. People can go to other providers. Funding is key. It's a core component of sustainability. So any sustainable solution must be financially viable over the long term. It just has to be. I can't see all of my notes here, so just give me a second. I've got to pull up my hard copy because I've got pictures stuck in front of it. Sorry about that. There are a range of options for how you can go about funding. There's increasingly more and more options available if you have a sustainable solution for government funding, and that needs to be looked at. But even if it's being privately funded, Flow looks at a range of different ways for funding solutions. It can be upfront funded by the developer landowner, or you can look at what we call DSPs, developer service payments, whereby contributions are paid on a per lot basis as product is handed over. We're at the early phases of doing it, but there are more innovative models being looked at of land value capture as well, whereby the uplift in land value that's created by the services being delivered a part of that can flow back to the utility as a means of funding the development, if that makes any sense. Delivery, that picture on the left is the Central Park facility, or a part of it, sitting in a basement. The picture on the right is our facility at Box Hill North, an aerial. I think I've talked pretty much about all of this, so I don't think there's really any more there that I need to say, other than this is a business that actually is delivering. So this is not conceptual, this is real. These plants are out there, they are successfully delivering. The proof is in the pudding, if you want to put it that way. It ain't theory, it's practice.